My name is Ethan Miller, and at the time all of this happened, I was a 29-year-old English teacher living in a small town in Colorado. I had been teaching for about 5 years, and even though the salary wasn't impressive, I genuinely loved my job. There was something fulfilling about watching a student finally understand a lesson they once struggled with. My apartment was a modest 2-bedroom place near the school, nothing fancy, but it felt like home to me. One room was my bedroom, and the other was a small office where I graded papers and prepared lessons. The walls were covered with bookshelves, sticky notes, and old essays that inspired me to keep teaching. Money was always tight, but I managed to pay my rent, my bills, and keep my old Ford Focus running. The biggest weight on my shoulders was the $52,000 student loan debt hanging over my head. Every month I watched a chunk of my paycheck disappear into loan payments, and it felt like a never-ending cycle. Still, I stayed optimistic because I believed my work mattered, and that was enough for me. My mom, Diane Miller, was one of the strongest and most loving people I knew. She raised me on her own after my dad walked out when I was 8, and she never let me feel unloved. She worked long shifts as a registered nurse, often coming home exhausted, but she still made time for me. She helped me with homework, attended school events, and taught me how to cook, clean, and take care of myself. She believed in kindness, patience, and treating people the way you want to be treated. She also had a spiritual side that some people found unusual, but to me, it made her even more unique. She believed in energy cleansing, moon phases, crystals, and tarot cards, but never in a forceful or dramatic way. Her house felt peaceful, filled with plants, soft colors, and the calming smell of lavender. She never tried to convert anyone to her beliefs, and she respected people who didn't understand them. To her, spirituality was about healing, comfort, and staying grounded in a chaotic world. For most of my life, it was just the two of us, and we formed a bond that was strong and unbreakable. I visited her often, not because I needed help, but because I genuinely enjoyed her company. Some of my favorite memories were simple things like cooking dinner together or talking on her porch at sunset. Then I met Emily Carter, the woman who would eventually test everything I believed in. I met her at a local coffee shop where she worked while finishing her marketing degree. Emily was beautiful, confident, and charming in a way that drew people in effortlessly. Her smile was bright, her laugh was contagious, and she made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. We connected instantly, and it didn't take long before we started dating. In the beginning, everything felt easy, exciting, and full of possibility. Emily supported my teaching career, attended school events with me, and claimed she admired my passion. She even got along with my mom at first, or at least that's what I believed back then. Looking back, I can see the small cracks that appeared early on, but at the time, I ignored them. I thought I had found someone who understood me and accepted the life I chose. I had no idea how quickly everything would change once she entered the next chapter of her life. Things began to shift after Emily graduated and landed a higher-paying marketing job in Denver. Her new lifestyle came with new friends, new expectations, and a noticeable change in how she viewed my career. She started making little comments about my salary, wrapped in jokes that didn't feel like jokes anymore. "You're too smart to stay a teacher forever," she'd say, laughing as if it were harmless encouragement. But the tone hinted that teaching wasn't good enough for someone she planned a future with. At first, I brushed it off and assumed she was just adjusting to her new environment. But the comments grew more frequent and more pointed as she became more absorbed in her corporate world. Then her criticism slowly shifted from my career to my relationship with my mom. It started small, like a casual remark when I mentioned visiting on Sunday. "Again, didn't you just see her last week?" she asked, eyebrows raised as if it were unusual. I explained that Sunday dinners were a tradition for us, something we'd done for years. She gave a tight smile and shrugged, but I could see she didn't like it. Soon, the remarks stopped being subtle and turned into uncomfortable jabs. "She still calls you every day. That's not normal for an adult man, Ethan." I tried to explain that we were close, because it had been just the two of us for most of my life. Emily nodded, but her expression showed judgment rather than understanding. Her real discomfort surfaced when she began commenting on my mom's spiritual practices. At first, she pretended to find them quirky and amusing. She accepted the herbal teas, listened to tarot readings, and held the crystals Mom offered out of politeness. But one day, after we left my mom's house, she laughed in the car and said something I'll never forget. "It's cute that she plays pretend witch, but isn't she a nurse? Shouldn't she believe in science?" I felt a sting of discomfort, but I tried to defend my mom gently. I told her Mom believed in medicine and spirituality working together, not against each other. Emily rolled her eyes and muttered, "Sounds like she's stuck in a fantasy world." The more Emily's career advanced, the more embarrassed she seemed to be about my background. She started suggesting I should move to Denver, leave teaching, and aim for more in life. Whenever I expressed happiness in my job, she acted like I was choosing failure. What bothered me most wasn't her ambition, but how she began treating my mom. Instead of appreciating Mom's kindness, she acted bored or annoyed during our visits. She stayed on her phone at dinner, rarely thanked Mom for meals, and ignored her attempts at conversation. Mom never complained, but I could see the disappointment behind her smile. The real breaking point of the shift came during a weekend dinner, where Mom mentioned the moon cycle. Emily smirked and kicked me under the table, as if Mom were telling a childish fairy tale. That night, Emily told me I needed stronger boundaries with my mother. She said successful adults didn't cling to their parents, and I needed to grow up. I remember lying awake, wondering when the person I fell for had turned into someone who resented the two things I loved most: my job and my mother. The tension continued to build until it became impossible to ignore anymore. It felt like every conversation with Emily turned into a debate about my priorities and whether I was too close to my mom. One evening after a long week, my mom invited us to her house for Thanksgiving dinner. She spent 2 days cooking, decorating, and preparing a warm holiday meal to include Emily in our tradition. Emily arrived an hour late, claiming she got stuck at work, even though her social media showed she was at a nail salon. She barely greeted my mom and spent most of the meal scrolling on her phone with a bored expression. When Mom brought out dessert, she also gave Emily a small wrapped gift she had picked out weeks before. Inside was a personalized leather-bound journal with Emily's initials engraved in gold lettering. Mom said she thought it could inspire Emily's marketing ideas and future career plans. Emily looked at it for less than 2 seconds and forced out a flat, "Oh, thanks, it's very rustic." The disappointment in my mom's eyes was subtle, but I saw it clearly, and it made my stomach twist. On the drive home, Emily called the gift old-fashioned and said she only used digital planning tools anyway. I stayed quiet, but inside I felt a shift, like something was cracking open inside me. A few weeks later, after an especially difficult day at work, everything finally exploded. I had dealt with 2 parent complaints, a student fight, and hours of grading that left me exhausted. When I got home, I mentioned that I wanted to call my mom to vent because she always listened. Emily snorted and said, "Of course you do. Mommy to the rescue with her magic crystals, right?" The sarcasm hit me harder than she expected, and for the first time, I didn't let it slide. I told her she didn't have to like my mom's beliefs, but she needed to respect them and respect our relationship. She threw her hands up and said she was only trying to help me grow up and stop relying on my mother. She began packing as if she had been holding in a speech for weeks, and now it was bursting out. She said my mom was manipulating me by keeping me close and helping me with small things like groceries. She claimed my mom wanted me dependent so she could control my life and sabotage my relationships. hearing her twist my mom's kindness into something toxic lit a fire inside me. I told her she was completely wrong, and that my mom had sacrificed everything to make sure I had a good life. Emily stared at me and said the words that turned a bad argument into a breaking point. "You need to choose, Ethan. A real future with me or this codependent attachment to your mother." The room went silent, and I felt my heart sink because I realized she meant every word. She wasn't jealous of my mother. She saw her as competition she wanted to eliminate. I didn't give her an answer that night because I needed clarity before saying something irreversible. The next morning, instead of going to school, I drove to my mom's house to talk. Mom listened to everything quietly, with that calm, thoughtful expression she always had when something serious was on my mind. When I finished, she didn't defend herself or blame Emily. She simply asked me one question that cut through all the noise in my head. "Do you think our relationship is unhealthy?" I sat there, thinking about our memories, our life, her sacrifices, and her love. And when I finally said, "No, I think it's loving," it felt like I could breathe again. Mom placed her hand over mine and told me something I didn't expect to hear. She said that if Emily truly made me happy, she would support the relationship even if it meant seeing me less. She reminded me that love doesn't demand separation from the people who raised you. Her words were gentle, but they hit with undeniable truth. I realized Emily wasn't asking for healthy boundaries. She was asking me to detach from the one person who had never abandoned me. That evening, I called Emily to talk, hoping she might understand my perspective. But the moment I mentioned keeping my relationship with my mom, her voice turned cold. "So you're choosing her over me," she said, as if the answer should have been obvious. I told her I wasn't choosing one over the other, because love shouldn't require that choice. Emily didn't budge and repeated her ultimatum, sounding more like a demand than a request. Her refusal to accept my family made something inside me shut down completely. I told her we were done, and before she could argue, I ended the call. For a moment, I felt guilty, but then a wave of relief washed over me. It felt like I had been carrying a weight I didn't recognize until it was gone. The next few days, Emily tried to contact me constantly, sending long messages and blaming my mom. She said I was throwing away my future and that I would regret choosing comfort over growth. When I didn't respond, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. She was crying, apologizing, and promising to tolerate my mom if that's what I needed. But the word tolerate told me everything I needed to know. I didn't want my partner to tolerate my mother. I wanted them to respect and appreciate her, even if they didn't share her beliefs. After I asked her to leave, she tried one last tactic: guilt. She claimed my mom had brainwashed me into believing her spiritual nonsense. It didn't work anymore, and I closed the door on that conversation for good. For the first time in months, I felt peace returning to my life. Mom didn't say, "I told you so," and she never celebrated the breakup. She simply hugged me and cooked dinner like she always did when I was hurting. Slowly, life began to feel normal again, and I regained the parts of myself I had compromised. I poured more time into my students, my friends, and the things that genuinely made me happy. I realized I had stopped doing many of those things because I spent so much energy managing Emily's reactions. The distance gave me clarity, and I began to see just how controlling the relationship had become. Emily hadn't wanted partnership. She had wanted ownership, wrapped in the language of ambition and self-improvement. Weeks passed, and I started to enjoy simple moments again without feeling judged. Mom and I rebuilt our routine of Sunday dinners, movie nights, and long talks. I felt like I had reclaimed not just my life, but my identity. What I didn't know was that life was preparing a twist I never saw coming, one that would expose Emily's true nature in the most shocking way. About 3 months after the breakup, something unexpected happened that flipped my entire world upside down. Mom called me one Thursday afternoon with a shaky voice I had never heard from her before. She asked me to come over after work because she had something important to show me. The moment I heard her tone, I assumed the worst and rushed to her house with my heart pounding. When I walked into the kitchen, she was sitting at the table staring at a piece of paper. For a second, I thought it was a medical test or something serious. But then she looked up at me with wide eyes and said 4 words that didn't make any sense at first. "Ethan, I won the lottery." I thought she was joking and waited for the punchline, but she slid the ticket and printed results toward me. The numbers matched perfectly. Every single one of them, exactly in the right order. She had won $2.6 million after taxes, a life-changing amount neither of us ever expected. Mom started laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the surreal reality of it. For years, she had bought 1 lottery ticket a week for fun and intuition, as she called it. I always teased her, telling her it was statistically pointless, and she always replied that dreaming was worth $1. Now here she was, holding the proof that sometimes intuition wins after all. Within days, Mom met with financial advisors and lawyers to make sure everything was handled responsibly. She didn't buy a mansion or start living extravagantly like some people might have. She stayed grounded, practical, and focused on long-term security and thoughtful decisions. She replaced her old car with a newer, safer one and set aside money for retirement. But the first big decision she made wasn't for herself. She handed me a check that made my hands shake the moment I saw the number. It was for the exact amount of my student loan debt, down to the last dollar. I told her I couldn't accept something so huge, but she put her hand on mine firmly. She said she had prayed for years that she could ease my burden so I could live freely. I cried harder than I had in a long time, and she hugged me like she did when I was a child. That night, I went home feeling lighter than I ever had as an adult. For the first time, my future didn't feel weighed down by debt or guilt or someone else's expectations. News of the lottery win spread quickly through our small town, as gossip always does. And of course, it wasn't long before the news reached Emily. The shift in her behavior was almost instant, and it exposed her true colors clearer than ever. She texted me out of nowhere, acting cheerful and nostalgic, saying she had been thinking about us. She said she missed what we had and wanted to talk about a second chance. I stared at the screen, knowing exactly what had triggered the sudden change. She didn't miss me. She missed the new version of my life she thought she could benefit from. And the moment she knocked on my door, her intentions became even more obvious. 2 days after her first text, Emily showed up at my apartment without warning, holding flowers and wearing the dress I used to compliment. She knocked softly at first, but when I didn't open, she called my name like we were still together. When I finally answered through the door, she smiled as if nothing had ever happened between us. She said she wanted to talk things out and believed we deserved another chance. Her tone was sweet, overly practiced, as if she had rehearsed every word in the mirror. I told her calmly that there was nothing left to talk about and that I had moved on. The sweetness vanished instantly, and a hint of irritation appeared in her voice. She said she heard about my mom, good fortune, and thought it could help us start fresh. That sentence confirmed exactly what I already knew. I told her we were not getting back together and asked her to respect my boundaries. Emily insisted she had changed and realized she had been too harsh about my relationship with my mom. She claimed she wanted to apologize to her in person and make things right. Her sudden respect sounded forced, like a performance meant to impress the audience she now hoped to benefit from. I didn't let her inside, and after a few more attempts to convince me, she left upset. I thought that was the end of it, but Emily wasn't done. The next day, she went to see my mom on her own, thinking she could win her over. When Mom called me later, she was laughing so hard she could barely get her words out. She told me Emily had shown up with an over-the-top apology, a dramatic speech, and a huge bouquet of roses. Emily talked about growth healing, and how she now understood the value of family. Mom listened politely, letting her finish her emotional performance without interrupting. When Emily finally stopped talking, Mom smiled at her with the calmest expression. She said one sentence that completely shattered Emily's act. "Well, Emily, thank you for your apology, but the witch says no." I burst out laughing when Mom repeated it to me, because it was the perfect response. Apparently, Emily didn't find it nearly as amusing. Her face twisted with shock and anger as she demanded to know if Mom was being serious. Mom nodded and told her she could sense Emily's intentions were not sincere. Emily tried to defend herself, saying she truly cared about me and wanted to rebuild the relationship. Mom responded that love isn't about convenience, timing, or money. She said Emily only returned when she thought there was something to gain. Emily lost her temper and accused my mom of turning me against her with manipulative spiritual nonsense. Mom stayed calm, sipped her tea, and said she didn't need crystals or cards to see through her. She simply asked Emily to leave and wished her well in finding someone whose values matched hers. Emily stormed off, shouting that we would regret rejecting her and slamming the gate behind her. After that encounter, she stopped contacting both of us, at least directly. I later heard from mutual acquaintances that she told people I had chosen money over love. But I knew the truth. Emily hadn't loved me. She loved the idea of what I could become if I lived the life she wanted. Mom and I sat on her porch that evening, laughing at the absurdity of it all. For the first time, I felt completely free from the weight of someone else's expectations. I realized how peaceful life could be when shared with people who love you for who you are, not what you offer. And in that moment, I silently thanked the universe for guiding me toward the choice I made months ago. Life after that felt lighter, calmer, and more genuine than it had in a long time. Mom and I used part of her winnings to travel, explore new places, and create memories we once only dreamed of. I moved into a slightly bigger apartment, not luxurious, but comfortable and filled with warmth and peace. I returned to teaching with a clearer mind and a renewed sense of purpose that my students instantly noticed. Eventually, I started dadding again, but with a different mindset than before. I no longer chased approval or tried to mold myself into someone else's expectations. I looked for someone who valued kindness, loyalty, and family the way I did. And when I met someone who asked to meet my mom without hesitation, I knew I was on the right path. Losing Emily didn't break me. It taught me what love should never feel like. My mom once told me that love doesn't ask you to shrink, abandon, or choose between the people who shaped you. Now I understand that deeply. If someone can't stand beside you without tearing down the people who raised you, they were never meant to stay. And the day I chose my mom wasn't the day I lost love. It was the day I finally learned what real love is.